Okay, I know what you're gonna say. Really, Roman? Another Charles Peralo video? Surely you're just milking this supposed drama or something. And to that I say, well, just let me get to the video. There was more going on behind the scenes than you probably would have thought. But I promise you, this is gonna be the final video. So, Charles Peralo. What more is there to say that I haven't already said? But to any newcomers who just discovered this video, I'll give you a brief rundown. I tried to get him into an interview that ended with us arguing back and forth, then I made a video about it, then he posted evidence when I confronted something about him while he tried to berate me as much as possible, which then led to the second video, and this is where we are. So, what does this video offer? What background information warranted a third video on this? Well, it's in the form of a response, and also revealing some other background information because the conversation did not end there with the whole trying to sue me for defamation. So, strap yourselves in as we go on for one final ride with Charles Peralo. So, where does this new background information start from? Well, funny enough, it actually started during the production of the second video. Specifically when I was recording the lines and getting the music for the video. So, let's see what the emails say. The first email that was sent to me was Charles being surprised that I accused him of blackmailing. For those who don't know, Charles tried to make me delete the video and replace it with an interview that talks positive about him. The conditions I had to adhere to were to not only delete the video, but also title the video Charles Peralo is pretty cool, and also apologize for misinformation I spread. And when I didn't comply, he threatened to report it to YouTube and sue me for defamation. The rest of the email is just Charles trying to convince me that I'm a fraud, mostly because I refused to take the video down. It's so obvious in the email exchange that Charles genuinely wants to make me feel bad about making the video. And it's only because he had to hear things that he didn't want to hear. And look, I don't know how many times I'm gonna say this, but I'm just gonna say it in this video anyway. I'm not keeping the video up because it's some sort of coping mechanism. I'm keeping it up because it shows how much of a piece of shit you are. Then he talks about how he is a guy who has donated a lot of money to charity, while I'm just someone who supposedly did all this just for internet drama. Once again, trying to shift the blame onto me by saying I started this drama in the first place just for the sake of starting drama. And then he tries to scare me by saying that he's not going to donate to St. Jude's anymore. He also says the reason he didn't take any accountability or responsibility was because he'd done so multiple times. Which is obviously referring to charity, even though I'm not even talking about charity in the first place. But moving on, one of my final exchanges with him was bringing up a comment that I found to be very suspicious. It was a comment made from a man named David P5341, and as you can tell, it's very much a shill for Charles. He's not even being slick about it because he just quote mines what I say in the emails. And he didn't make one comment defending Charles. He made multiple, both in the video and in the comment where I confront Charles about the No Kid Hungry donation. And these are the comments that I suspected to be friends of Charles. One is from John Appleseed, who mentions to have read the email exchange, and this is one that I suspect to be a friend of Charles. I can't confirm as a fact, but the way he says he could sue you for defamation is eerily similar to the email exchange. But I really don't know if it's a genuine friend or a troll, so we'll just keep neutral about this person. And according to Charles, that David P guy was his friend Dave. And then he once again tries to shoehorn in another delete this video moment, to which at that point I just blocked him. I knew this thing wouldn't come to a viable conclusion and it would just go on forever had I not blocked him, so I just decided to block him and leave him. And that was the end of our email exchange for good. Now that we've moved on from the email exchange section, let's move on to the response section. So as I said in the intro, all of this went down during the production of the second video. One of the most interesting was a response on his community posts. He also made a response on my original video, which is him mostly saying how terrible I acted during trying to get him into an interview. And I do agree on that part, but most of the comments are just what we've just discussed, trying to accuse me of supposed misinformation about the charity thing. But other than that, there's nothing really to say about this response, so let's just move on to the community tab response. Because let me tell you, it's a mixture of bullshit, downplaying, and exaggeration. So what I'll do is that I'll show you what he said in the community response, and then I'll point out the issues I have. So the first section is just talking about interviews, where he talks about his past experiences with interviews, and this is where he mentions me trying to ask for an interview, and does point out the flaws I had when approaching him. And as I said in my first video, I do agree about me being a shit on my delivery. The reason I said what I said was because I didn't want to be shrouded in mystery. I wanted to present myself as outgoing, so I overshared, and that was my ultimate flaw. I really didn't want to come off as mean in the initial email, and for that I do take massive responsibility for it. Moving on, he goes on to mention that we argued for a bit where I called him a narcissist and we ended on fairly angry terms. And this is the first issue I have with the response. To me, this is a case of addressing something but also downplaying it. Like, he mentions how heated we got during those email exchanges. Well, all he just says is that I called him a narcissist and we left on angry terms. He doesn't bother mentioning any information that we had in those emails. He simply obscures all of it and just says that I called him a narcissist. Moving on, he mentions how I confronted him on his channel about the charity, saying how I reached out to one of the charities and they told me that they didn't have his name in the database, to which he forwarded the receipts to me through email. One thing that somewhat bugs me about this section is the fact he mentions he sent several hundred receipts, which is funny because he only sent me 3. Now, I'm not saying that he should have forwarded all of the receipts, but it's weird to say that you forwarded several hundred when you only forwarded 3. Once again, he's lying to make himself look like the hero. And now this is the section where things just get fucking awful. The first part involves him mentioning the video I made about him, which he says that it accused him of being a fraud and said he lied about the charity, which shows yet again that he's trying to villainize me in order to make himself look good. And also the way he says it just really irks me for some reason. It's almost like he wants to convince his fans that what I said in the video was basically stating a fact when it was far from the case. I made it very clear in my video that this was not meant to be taken as a fact, but it was more surrounded in skepticism more than anything. And while I maybe said some misinformation here and there, most of the information I provided in the video was mainly from my personal experience. More specifically, how I observed everything. And usually with observing things from months ago, it can lead to some false memories, which is why I inform my audience to take this information with a grain of salt. Moving on, this is a section that I would basically consider the worst of the response. First off, he says that he was genuinely impressed about me reaching out to the charities, which according to him, showed the true professional journalism. This is a straight up lie, because in the emails he said that it was insane for me to reach out to the charities. He knew that if he said that it was insane to do something like that in his community post, then people would be hounding him more for saying that. The next paragraph states that he showed clear proof that he was donating to the charities, which, let me remind you, that was only one time he showed clear proof. The one time I tried to tell him where were the receipts posted, he just made a flimsy excuse. And the next part talks about him wanting to agree to an interview by me, but he says that I will do it on the one condition that I take down the video. This is another case of him addressing something but also downplaying it. He only mentions one of the conditions and completely misses out on the other 3. The third and the second one are the most interesting one to me, because it really just showed that he wanted to use his power to take advantage of me by turning me from a detractor to a fan. That way, the situation would have been resolved with him having to not do anything about it. Another weird thing I want to point out is that in the very last section, he says that in the interview, I could talk about whatever I want to talk about. Not once did he mention about the idea of me talking about whatever I want to talk about. Not only that, but he didn't even provide any background information about the interview whatsoever, just saying that he'll do the interview under a strict set of conditions. And the last part said that I said no, called him an arse, and told him that the video was staying up. Once again, it's a case of addressing something and also downplaying it. Because no, I didn't just call him an arse, I actually gave him reasons as to why I wasn't gonna do the interview. Here is the actual response I gave him declining the interview. The very last part is just him insulting me, saying that I'm just a nobody. Saying that I was immature and just couldn't take no as an answer. So that was the end of the whole response. But he did link 4 images of the emails. The first one is an introduction to him saying he's gonna address this stupid criticism. He pulls up my first email about me offering him an interview. The next one is his response to my interview saying he's going to decline. And the last one was one of my emails. Now before I get my criticisms out of the way, I'm gonna dedicate this time to address something because this is very important. This is linked to my usage of the term somewhat and potentially. Now you may be wondering, why do I want to dedicate this time to addressing using terms? Well, it comes in the form of me looking like I'm doubling down on this. As you can see in the emails, I say that I admit he is somewhat not lying and that I was willing to say sorry for potentially lying to everyone that you faked the charity donations. Now in the context of the emails, it actually does make me look like a bad guy. I could see where people are coming from with the idea that I am doubling down and just not refusing to admit any fault. But there is a reason as to why I said what I said in that email. Let me explain. When I say that he is somewhat not lying, it's my way of saying it's a 50-50 scenario. What I mean by that is while he hasn't showed me all of the proof, he has showed some of the proof. But in either scenario, both show that he is donating to charities and keeping his word. So the reason I used the somewhat part was to say that you have showed some of the proof that you donated to charities. But it didn't mean that I was doubling down in any way. In fact, it was very far from the case. I simply stated that he showed some proof, but not all of it, but I'm happy either way. Moving on to the potentially part, it was more of the same. The context around the sentence was if I said something that was blatantly untrue, then I was willing to say sorry for saying that. As I said previously in the video, most of the research from the first video came from memory, so it was easy to make unintentionally false assumptions. But I tried to do my best to not make any baseless accusations whatsoever. The reason it was made from memory because most of the things I said couldn't really be accessed because they happened from months past. And usually with community posts, you can't go back to ones more than 3 weeks. So I really just had to wing it and use what I can remember best. So when I used potentially, I was referring to something that I may have said that unintentionally that was a blatant lie. So if he told me something in the video that I said was a blatant lie, then I was willing to say sorry for saying that. It was never my intention to spread misinformation about this whole thing. The potentially part was really more of an umbrella term to say the least. Like if any lie I said in the video was more than one, then I used the word potentially just to substitute for that. And that is why I used those words. But in my opinion, it was simply down to poor wording. Poor wording that can be twisted into a narrative that makes you the hero, which is definitely what Charles did. While I wouldn't say it's taken out of context, I can definitely say that the narrative is twisted to make himself look like the hero and me the villain. Added on to the fact that he uses terms like trashing and insulting, and you've essentially got something that paints me as an attention-seeking troll, one that is very adamant on a false outcome. So yeah, it wasn't because I was doubling down, it was simply poor wording that was twisted to make it sound more terrible than it actually was. So all in all, it was a shitty response. It's completely disingenuous in every single way, and is more or less an ego stroke for Charles. Mostly because of how much he wants to sell you as being the good guy in this situation. And that is all I have to say in this video. As for my final words for Charles, none.